Excellencies, distinguished guests, we are about to begin this high-level luncheon on partnerships for the SDGs. Can I ask you all to please take your seats as we are about to begin? President of the General Assembly, heads of state and heads of government, Excellencies, distinguished guests. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this high-level lunch on partnerships for SDG implementation, hosted by the President of the General Assembly. I will perhaps pause for 1 second while everyone takes their seat at their designated table, each table focusing on an individual Sustainable Development Goal. We do have to get this conversation going, so I would ask everyone to please take their seats. You did very well. President of the General Assembly, heads of state and government, Excellencies, distinguished guests. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this high-level luncheon on partnerships for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, a luncheon that was called for by the President of the General Assembly. Now, after all the renewed commitments we heard today made at the very highest levels by governments, by representatives of the public and private sectors, and members of civil society, we meet once again to take the discussion, hopefully, a step further. We all know what has to be done to fulfill the ambitious 2030 agenda. Now is our opportunity to discuss practical ways of achieving our goal by identifying the key stakeholders in this process, renewing some of the existing strategic partnerships, and inspiring new ones and building on them for the future. Now, in the end, you might argue it all boils down to resources and priority setting. What are the essential elements then that we can identify here today needed to build the kind of coalitions that will support the implementation of the SDGs? Everyone in this room can make a significant contribution. Heads of state and government, ministers, CEOs, academics, members of the UN system and NGOs, all sitting around tables dedicated to each one of the 17 SDGs. It is a chance to brainstorm and to think outside the box about ideal partnerships in an ideal world, and also a chance to work within the realm of what is ideal, but also what is feasible, realistic, and achievable. So think big, think bold. The purpose of this session is to enhance existing partnerships, as we say, and inspire new ones around the SDGs, to build multi-stakeholder partnerships in a transparent, inclusive, and accountable way. We'll have the opportunity to hear from many of the political, business leaders, but also members of civil society here today about how this can be done in an effective and responsible way. More on that a little bit later, but first it is my great pleasure to give the floor to the President of the General Assembly, Måns Lykketoft. His initiative to bring all the stakeholders together here today highlights the transformation needed on the road towards a 2030 agenda, starting with the last but certainly not the least of SDGs, SDG 17, on revitalizing the global partnership on sustainable development. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you once again. I'm delighted to see so many of you join also this lunch. I believe we are on the threshold of a huge global transformation. A sustainable and just world is possible. We must make it inevitable. The time has come for us to roll up our sleeves and get to work to deliver. And over the next 1.5 hours, we will focus on a key tool for doing so, namely the multi-stakeholder partnerships. Many of you have seen firsthand how partnerships brought a surge of finance, technology, innovation, expertise to achieve the MDGs. Others of you have steeped in the climate arena partnering with each other and thousands of others outside these walls. You have delivered truly inspiring initiatives in recent years. Partnerships and initiatives on health, energy, agriculture, education, and cities provide us with many lessons. They show us how we can work together and reach farther, faster. They demonstrate how actors across sectors and boundaries can unite around common vision for economic and social advancement. They help us to raise standards, increase ambition levels, and most importantly, deliver some truly outstanding improvements in people's lives. Effective partnerships can create coalitions of willing actors that can share and diffuse knowledge, costs, and expertise. And they can open new markets and prepare the ground for innovative and strategic developments. The transformation demanded by 2030 requires all this at scale. It requires partnerships that work together and respond to integrated, indivisible, and universal nature of the SDGs, partnerships that deliver change to address deeply rooted problems like poverty, inequality, injustice, and environmental degradation. Partnerships that insist on the highest possible standards of transparency, accountability, inclusivity, and governance. Much of this, however, depends on the engagement of a diverse range of actors, which requires, amongst others, that we overcome challenges relating to trust and understanding between those actors. Finally, it will require courageous and progressive leaders and early movers. Each of you, representing member states, business, civil society, the UN system, financial institution, academia, other stakeholders, are leaders in your own fields. You have the experience to make partnerships work. You have immense capacity to move the sustainable development forward. But together, across borders and silos, you can move them even further. Our excellent moderator, Mrs. Fakhri, will guide us through a discussion the next 1.5 hours. She will help us to identify the essential elements of partnerships, as well as the actions that must be taken to create a new wave of truly groundbreaking partnerships. I look forward to a frank discussion, to fresh ideas, and hopefully the seeds for future collaborative actions. Bon appétit.
Thank you, President Lukatov, for your kind words, and most of all, thank you for this timely and firm call to action. Now, before you begin to roll up your sleeves, perhaps we can start by addressing one of the key issues that President Lukatov mentioned in his remarks, the need to build trust and understanding among the diverse range of actors. So our first segment will bring together leaders from the private sector as well as civil society. We'll also look at the role the public sector obviously plays in this. We'll try to identify ways they can all work together, how they do, and how their working partnerships can actually be improved so that they can all work more effectively and efficiently together. So as I call on all of our three participants in this moderated dialogue to join me here on the stage, and they are Jeremy Oppenheim, Peter Backer, and Ria Sa, let me just say a couple of words as we transition from MDGs to SDGs. Let us think about perhaps the following issues. What new opportunities are there for private-public engagement? Why do SDGs make good economic sense? And how can business be aligned with the SDGs? Let me now join our discussants here on the stage. Jeremy Oppenheim, Peter Backer, Ria Sa. So as you take your seats, let us look at Ria Sa joining us. I think I will use this microphone as I'm not quite sure that the other one is working. Okay. Let me just briefly introduce our first speaker here, Jeremy Oppenheim. He is the program director at the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, which was launched in Davos in January of 2016 to bring together leaders from business, finance, civil society, labor, and international organizations. Jeremy Oppenheim, one of the Commission's main aims is to illustrate the economic gains business can make towards implementing the SDGs. Why should the private sector, in your opinion, and through the work you have done talking to these stakeholders in the private sector, why should they treat the SDGs as a strategic priority?
Well, look, thank you for the invitation to be with you. I mean, I think all know that if you want to get the private sector deeply engaged, they need to see this as a real growth opportunity, a real commercial opportunity. It's well understood, I think, by everybody in this room. In all honesty, if you go to boardrooms across the world today, the question of sustainable development generally is not amongst the top 2, 3 things that people are talking about. They're talking about digital, they're talking about the state of the world economy, they're talking about very specific challenges within their own sector, hyper competition of one form or another. There are all sorts of other things going on in the boardrooms.
So how do you focus their attention on these issues then?
And our task, and the central task of the Commission, is to essentially describe what we think the economic opportunity could be associated with the Sustainable Development Agenda. We want to translate it into language that business leaders can understand. We want to take what the President rightly said is an angle around first mover advantage, not just waiting for others to show up, but showing how the right approaches can deliver competitive advantage. And we also want to show the flip side, which is that businesses that fail to take this agenda with conviction and authority run serious risks of falling behind. And we've seen this over the last few years. If you're in Europe and you've been in the power sector and you had ignored the shift to a low carbon energy system, which a number of companies for one reason or another did, right, they have been left with very significant stranded assets. We've seen companies here in the States that have ignored the shift to low carbon, and particularly in the coal sector, not just here in the States, but 5 companies in Australia declaring bankruptcy. So we want to tell a story that is rich with opportunity, rich with options, but also honest about the fact that failure to act can lead to real competitive disadvantage. And that's our task.
Well, let's put a similar question to Peter Backer, who's president of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, a CEO-led organization of forward-thinking companies aimed at galvanizing the global business community to create a sustainable future. Is the business sector now beginning to realize the opportunities that lay in this sustainable development agenda and the need to take early action on issues like climate change?
No, I think absolutely. If you look around the room and see the amount of business leaders that are here today that were here in last September when we talked about climate agenda, the group is quickly growing and action is beginning to flow. More people than ever, business people than ever, were in Paris during the Paris Agreement. The finance sector has now really caught on to this. Very important movements are happening. The task force for climate-related disclosure is going to change the way business is governed, will report and disclose its impacts. In many ways, I said to the President of the General Assembly this morning, the Paris Agreement and the whole move to climate action, the inevitability to move to a low-carbon society is going to guide the way for all of the SDGs. My organization has worked last year with 170 global companies on 9 big business solutions. Not only will that have massive impact on the emissions, i.e. on climate change, but working on climate impacts 11 of the 17 SDGs. And that's going to be the big trick going forward. I have said boldly this morning, and those of you who know me, that's how I normally speak, is there is no business person in the world, or at least very few, there's no boardroom in the world, or at least very few, that will wake up and say, today I'm going to work on goal 15. That's not how business operates. But if business focuses on making the food system sustainable, or urban development sustainable, or the energy system sustainable, they will touch all of the SDGs. And through the disclosures, So I already told Governor Carney that it's fantastic to have a task force on climate-related disclosures. Next year, we need a task force on SDG-related disclosures, because it's the same thing. We need transparency, we need accountability, and then action will move.
And you mentioned two crucial elements, transparency and accountability, and I suppose this is where civil society comes in to try to provide these checks and balances on political and economic power, and to look at the ways in which these relationships and partnerships are actually advanced. So Riaz, as president of the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is one of the US's most effective environmental action organizations, how convinced are you by the arguments that have been put forward? Because listening to Peter Bakker and Jeremy Oppenheim, it seems like the private sector is on board and fully keen to not just endorse and take measure to fulfill the SDGs, but to actually really actively work toward them. Is that enough?
Well, it's certainly a wonderful start. First, let me just say how honored and privileged I am to be here. It's really wonderful. And it's also a wonderfully historic occasion to be talking about civil society on the eve not only of a historic signing agreement, but on the eve of Earth Day. So when we think about the role of civil society, what civil society should do, both within the context of the conversation that we're having, but also within the larger context of our worlds, I would just ask you to look across that East River and think about what that view looked like in 1970, the very first year of Earth Day. You could hardly see across that river in 1970, in large part because the pollution in New York City was so terrible. And so asking ourselves the question about, well, what was Earth Day all about? And what did it result in? You don't need to look farther than the window and across the East River to realize the consequences that civil society have on, and the impacts that civil society has on governments and people worldwide. Civil society fundamentally is how we bring government by the people, for the people, to the people. It's fundamentally how we can leverage both individual action to be heard and recognized and to be leveraged into movements and actions that have already changed the world and will continue to change the world in ensuring that the aspirations of individuals, their hopes and dreams of a just, equitable, and sustainable society are achieved. So civil society is everything from movements to organizers, campaigns, prosecutors, litigators, scientists, and public advocates. And when we think about the role of civil society, particularly with the question on accountability, there's no better opportunity for us to think about this question than with the Paris Accords, which for the first time, as many of you know, have concrete mechanisms for which to hold each of the countries to account on the plans that they have submitted. Now that is in itself historic, and it provides not only civil society an opportunity to ensure and uphold those agreements by holding governments into account, but it allows, again, it allows governments themselves to have a better and more transparent process to measure their own progress towards their goals. Allow me
just a very quick follow-up, a brief answer if you would, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but one of the common grievances of civil society is that the private sector is not held accountable. Do you share that view, and how do you change this perception, perhaps this reality?
Well, I absolutely think the private sector should be held accountable. One of the things that NRDC has long done is use the power of litigation to not only hold governments accountable, but to hold businesses accountable. There are mechanisms within the laws of the United States to do that. There are mechanisms within the laws of other countries to do that as well. I think what needs to fundamentally happen and be changed within the private sector, and I would be very interested in getting perspectives from my other panelists on this point, is that while we have heard and seen a tremendous amount of leadership by the private sector in recent years, certainly in Paris itself, there seems to be a disconnect between that leadership and the reality of what is happening in policy realms around the world. So how do we close that disconnect?
How do we bridge that gap? How do you close that disconnect? Question to Jeremy Oppenheim. What changes essentially need to be made within the private sector to enhance this question of trust and accountability? What needs to change?
So look, I think one obvious statement is that there isn't one thing called the private sector. Right? So I would encourage us as we get into the real conversation about how to shift this thing, we begin to break it into different groups. I would say that there are parts of the so-called private sector that, and many, frankly, small and medium enterprises are not that transparent and not that accountable. So we need to be quite careful before we romanticize one bit of the private sector and vilify another bit.
No, but we could still address the question, the fundamental question, of transparency and accountability within the sector.
So the real question of how we drive up the real delivery, including the transparency, will come from better data, right? It will come from the financial sector doing what the financial sector, in fact, does extremely well when it chooses to, which is holding companies to account. And what we want is for that, the investors, for all of us at the end as savers and pension holders, to hold companies to account not just on, if you will, financial performance narrowly described, but the broader performance of companies. Okay. And if we can get those mechanisms, plus more data, plus the real power of competition to come in, that is what, in the end, holds the private sector to account.
Peter Backer, what specific mechanisms would you like to see put in place, and what specific partnerships would you say work best for the private sector, for businesses, to enhance their delivery of the SDGs?
Well, it's interesting that we always talk about trust when it comes to the private sector. I think if you look into the Edelman barometer, it's the combination of government and businesses in which trust has been lowering and lowering year after year. If you look into some of the elections around the world, it's very clear there's a big distrust in leadership. I would say the SDG framework is the biggest gift that we have given ourselves, because it gives an agenda going forward that we can all rally behind. If we now do a few things, number one, tell the stories of great things that are happening. There's companies here, IKEA, the CEO of Olam this morning was talking. There's many more examples of great things happening, and the stories aren't being told well enough. The second thing is, like I said, the disclosure. We need to get to a standard by which every company discloses not only its climate impacts, but all its SDG impacts, so that we know who are the better players and who are the laggards. And the third thing that you then do, once you know, because you have standardized the disclosures, you go after the ones who don't want to play, and you vilify them, and that's going to be it. Success stories, standards of disclosures, and then go after the laggards.
Would you agree, Ria, sir? How do you get to the right standards, in essence? What new roles, models would you like to see of engagement put in place between the different multi-stakeholders in this discussion?
Well, I am very much heartened and agree with my panelists' contributions with respect to the reality that there are increasingly opportunities to both hold ourselves and each other accountable. I think it's just the beginning, and the beginning doesn't simply start with the SDG goals. It doesn't simply start with the transparency mechanisms that are included in the Paris Accords. It starts in the investment firms on Wall Street. It starts in the corporate headquarters across this nation, so that it's inbred within each of our sectors, this level of accountability and transparency and responsibility. And until we ourselves take on that responsibility and have that inculcated into our own cultures, that's when we'll see the true transformation that I think we need.
Jeremy Oppenheim, back to you on this issue of the right partnerships that we need to establish. I know through your work and your Commission's work, you've advised a lot of governments, non-governmental organizations as well. But how important is it for governments to pave the way, essentially to lead, in order to create a more conducive environment for these types of vital strategic partnerships that we're talking about?
If we want to get markets to work in a way that then delivers the SDG opportunity at scale, that will only happen if we get governments and businesses and civil society working together to design the right regulations, to put them in place in a way that is actually effective to tackle in multiple dimensions tough challenges, for example, around issues of corruption, right, which take more than one party to play out. So there is no question that the partnership agenda is absolutely central. But I think we also need to be very clear that there are different kinds of partnerships that will serve different purposes, and some work well and some work much less well. So the partnerships which are around, for example, specific developments of approaches to market innovation, partnerships that are designed to drive and improve the development of infrastructure assets, both are critical, both are very different from each other, and we'll need to, again, just as with the private sector, we will need to break down this notion of partnerships and get specific and detailed about what works in different situations.
Thank you very much, Jeremy Oppenheim. And as I get to the final thoughts of our other discussants, Jeremy Backer, what would the ideal partnership look for from your perspective?
I think if it's only one, then I would say the biggest achievement out of Paris was that if I say 1.5 degrees, everybody in this room knows what I'm talking about. There is no equivalent 1.5 degrees for each of these SDGs yet. So we're all having views on what it might be, but we don't have a common goal. So I say the big next step is science-based SDG targets for all of us to go after. So the collaboration between science, business, and governments, with civil society challenging the whole thing, that's going to be the step that will drive us to accelerate.
Riasa, your final thoughts on this. What do the ideal partnerships look like, and how do you create that robust sort of framework needed?
So I guess to fulfill my role as a person from civil society to challenge convention, I will just say that the word partnership in and of itself is sometimes a little worrying. That there's been a lot of partnerships over the course of time around environmental issues, around climate issues, a lot of voluntary agreements, and we have seen very clearly that those are insufficient for tackling the challenges that we have at hand. And so how do we work together? How do we come together? How do we truly try to be collaborative? But then how do we truly ensure that we come out with something that is tangible and concrete, meaningful, and has teeth? That is what I think the world is waiting for. That is what we seek to accomplish within the guise of environmental actions within the United States. It's what we try to accomplish, and I believe in some ways we have with the Paris Accords. But unless these things have teeth, have real consequence, I think partnerships can get us part of the way there, but not all of the way there.
Riasa, thanks very much. And as you say, that is of the essence, how to turn great ideas, great noble intentions into concrete action. In other words, into reality. Riasa, Peter Backer, Jeremy Oppenheim, thank you all very much indeed for joining us for this segment of our discussion. Well, you just heard there representatives of some of the key pillars of society agree and disagree about the way forward. Now is your chance to engage in this discussion. At each table, there are heads of government, heads of state, CEOs, members of civil society, leaders of international and UN agencies, members of academia. And each table, as I said earlier, is dedicated to one individual SDG. But as you know, of course, the nature of these SDGs and this framework is that there are many cross-cutting issues that can also be looked at. But each table essentially will have a designated leader who will lead the discussion on how we can best implement that specific SDG and how the process can ultimately benefit the other SDGs as well. The discussion leaders know who they are. I would simply ask them all to introduce themselves to those around them before we begin this part of our exercise. We will try to structure this into 3 distinct parts. So what we would ask of you initially And this is an exercise that will take about 45 minutes as you enjoy your lunch. But we will initially break it down into three. The first segment, to make the discussions more focused, will look at one specific issue. We will ask you all to envision a world with no restraints. What would the ideal partnerships look like for you? So this is a chance for all of us to dream and to dream big. What would the ideal partnerships look like if there were absolutely no restraints? And you will find on your tables a tablet that looks something like this. And we have also some of our technical staff and helpers who will make their way through this delegates dining room. And if you need help, they're more than happy to offer help while you go through this. So for 10 minutes, if you could please ponder on this question, and you'll see once you open your tablet, there is one specific question relating to which SDG your table is focusing on. And from that point on, if you could please look at all of the elements that you should choose from if you were to look at ideal partnerships. And you can choose something like 5 out of the whole list that is presented before you. So I will let you take your time and look at this, and I'll be back here in 10 minutes. Now, I trust that everyone has had the opportunity to engage in a robust, in a fruitful discussion of all the key issues that were captured in our questionnaire here today about how we move forward these partnerships for SDGs. If I can ask everyone, please, to focus for a few moments on the stage as we get ready to embark on our final section of this luncheon, which is a moderated, thank you very much. So if I can ask for your attention, may I please have your attention, please? Now that everyone has had the chance to share their experience around partnerships and their vision of the way partnerships can best be built and strengthened to advance the 2030 agenda, it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage 5 discussion leaders. They will report back on the key outcomes of their conversations. What key challenges and opportunities for new partnerships did they identify? So we also look forward to getting the insights of other discussion leaders who may not be on the stage when we open the floor to any additional contributions some of you would like to make. But first, let's get the view from the stage. And if I can invite to join me here the 5 discussion leaders who are Mr. Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, the President of the Republic of Croatia, Mr. Haig Geingob, the President of Namibia, Ms. Hayat Sindhi, President of the Institute for Imagination and Ingenuity and UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Sciences. She's also a member of the 10-member group facilitating work toward the SDGs. Could I also ask Jeff Seabright, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Unilever, to join us on the stage? You can all please make your way up to the stage and take your seats, while I finally also call on Rikin Patel, President and Executive Director of Avaz, which is the world's largest online political movement, to join me here as well. We are missing one more person who I called on earlier, but perhaps he is no longer with us. Is there someone else who would like to join us? Perhaps not. Let's start our discussion, and we will, as I say, have the chance to also hear from those of you who would like to join the conversation. We have microphones that will be circulating shortly. Let me start with you, Nikin Patel. I believe your table was focused on SDG 16, which is to do with peace, justice, and strong institutions, of course, building peace, justice, and strong institutions. What were the main outcomes of your discussions? What did you learn?
Is this on? Yes, it is. Hello, everybody. One thing I'd start with from our table is that something incredible just happened in December, and we all saw it, and it was Paris. And we took a massive objective, and we came together almost like one team in a symphony of sectors and humanity to achieve an ambitious goal that I know 18 months beforehand a lot of us didn't think was possible. And what that gives us, and there are many people here who contributed to that victory, it gives us a roadmap. Goal 16 is effective, accountable, transparent, representative, participatory governance, and massive reductions in violence. And it's an incredibly ambitious, sweeping goal. But it was put there for a reason, because we need it. It's catalytic. It inspires all the other goals. It enables them. And Paris gives us a roadmap for how to do that. So the pieces that we focused on was, taking these huge things like human rights or like good governance and articulating clear, winnable goals. What's the direction? What's the solution? How do we achieve it? Moving from the targets to the strategies. Then exercising a degree of empathy. Empathy in strategy. How much time have I got, Gita?
You can carry on.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Because if we're going to try and win these things, we've got to start with an understanding of the people we're seeking to serve. If we come out of this room with a plan that we concocted and directions that aren't responsive to where people are at, we will not be able to move them. And if there's one lesson from Paris, it's that if you want to move these big changes in the world, it has to be about people and rooted in people. So having the empathy for where people are at, having clear goals and strategies, understanding what are the game changers in those solutions, and coming together as a team in a culture that allows us to cooperate.
Thank you, Rick, and I think we will be able to expand on this as we go along, but essentially putting people at the center of this agenda, where it should be, and what it's all about, essentially. So moving from SDG 16 on to SDG 4, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, the President of the Republic of Croatia, is here to my left. What was the main outcome when it comes to your deliberations on how we bring quality education to the developing world as well as the developed world, how we tackle this issue?
Well, we had a very lively discussion at the table, and I think that the main conclusion is goal number 4, quality education, actually underlies all of the other SDGs. Without quality education, there is no development, there is no equality. Education is not just vocational education, it's not just economic or academic education, it's also education for life, for tolerance, for equality, for it's one of really of the most powerful weapons that we have against any kind of extremism. Education is so much more stronger than weapons. And education, the access to education for all, including for girls, who in today's world are denied the right to education or are punished because they go to school by having acid thrown into their faces or the schools being burned down. It's one of the pressing issues that we need to address. So looking at the challenges to quality education, we talked a lot about trust between private companies and some countries with other countries where we do need to invest a lot more. Of course, clear measurements, clear goals, a vision, sustainable financing, and results-oriented education is a challenge as well. What we have defined as chronic challenges is no shared vision, unclearly defined goals, no trust and understanding among partners, no good governance and leadership, and unsustainable financing. So in order to bridge the gap, we need to ensure all of that, including honest and transparent communication between all the stakeholders.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. President. As you mentioned, some of the key elements, clear goals, clear vision, transparency. That is relating to SDG 4, but it could easily be...
And funding.
And funding as well. So sustainable funding, the right type of resource building and capacity building. How does How do these essential elements translate into your discussion, Hayat, Cindy, when it comes to working toward the implementation of SDG 9, which is to do with industry, infrastructure, and innovation?
Hello, everyone. We had really amazing outcome from our table. As you know, SDG 9 is about infrastructure, roads, transport, electricity, connection, internet, and in so many huge figures of over billions of people are deprived from the benefit of electricity, connections, and internet. And one of the things that we came with is amazing ones. One of them one of my colleagues said, we need to recognize the difference between public, private sectors and government and civil society, and we need assurance from government that we can have freedom to operate with assurance limits. And that's, I think, one of the key things, that how we can get private sector really invest in developing world. I get a lot of this question. Okay, SDG is amazing, but how I'm going to implement that to the deprived world? I think that's one of the things that we came with. Also, I was lucky to sit to the foreign minister of Dagestan, and he said, we have we have mountains, but we don't have the technology to try to have a technology-based industrial zone. So we need the help of other countries who have this technology to be able to invest. But also we need to have to introduce, we have to have the opportunity to introduce, our opportunity, because sometimes the political issues can conflict the interest. And to fill the gap between the ideal zone and what we have at the moment, somebody should take the lead. Because if we wait for each other, nobody will move, and somebody needs to take the risk. And one of them said, finance is important, but we need to understand each other, and we need to learn from each other and try to design our own technology that fit our own infrastructure. Because it's nice, in the past we used to do cut and paste. It doesn't work at the moment. We need to have really change agent within society. We need to inject the tools of innovation and learning so we can have our own solutions instead of depending all the time of each other. And also we need to try to understand each other's way of life. So people say we need to have a good marriage. I don't know how that will be implemented, but that's one of the key things. And one last thing I really wanted to mention is that they said the government need to create a new market. They need to have incentive. New market in terms, introduce that. And that's quite crucial, especially if you are dealing with electricity, dealing with people are away from connections. Many different ideas here. I think we're going to submit that, but I think we get a very good outcome from our table.
Thank you very much, Hayat Cindy. And as you say, leadership being one of the crucial elements, which leads me now to turn it over to Jeff Seabright, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Unilever. What type of innovations are we looking for, or do we need in our approach moving forward? Because as you heard from the speakers who came before you, they still mentioned the fact that there are considerable obstacles before all of the SDGs. What types of solutions, innovative solutions, did your discussions come up with?
Well, thank you. And we were at a table that was blessed with both a current UN official, a former UN official, and 3 people from the business sector. Our focus was really around sustainable production and consumption. It's not on? Closer. Around sustainable production and consumption. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but did note that the Consumer Goods Forum, which I help co-chair with Paul Pullman on the sustainability front, is leading around food waste and the important 12.3 food waste halving by 2030 goal, working with governments and others in the World Resources Institute, and I think Andrew Steer is here, but also around avoided deforestation in supply chains and looking at how we can work more closely with governments around that. So some examples as well from the mining sector represented at our table, laying out a blueprint for how the metals and mining sector can achieve the SDGs. So a bit of attention on that. But the main focus was really on how do we step up the level of partnership. We heard from Ria from NRDC at the opening plenary. We've had a lot of partnerships in the past, but they haven't really risen to the occasion in terms of the level of change that we need to see if we want to realize the vision of zero poverty, zero carbon in the time frames that we need to meet. So how do we create transformational partnerships that really help shift markets and move very dramatically to the kinds of places that we need to be? And in that regard, we looked at three elements of success that we need to be really elevating. One is the role of leadership within the government, within the UN, within the business sector to help elevate this very critical element of success. It's a commodity that we need to expand in order to expand ambition. Secondly, we thought it's really critical that we focus on sectoral interventions, that when we talk about the business community at large and try to do partnerships that are very wide, they tend to be very shallow in terms of impact. But by going specific into a sector, into a very concrete, specific action, we can deliver real benefit that will have measurable impact. So sectoral focus. And then thirdly, making sure that we structure partnerships in ways that play to the true strengths of each of the partners, and that we're very clear around that. The UN has a tremendous role to play in convening and in legitimizing what these partnerships can do, but they can't do it all. And so really deferring to the strengths and capabilities of other partners is critical to get that magic balance of what it will take to get it done.
Jeff Seabright, thanks very much. And before we widen the discussion, let me perhaps just make this point. You mentioned the issue of leadership, and while we're here at the United Nations, there is no shortage of public pronouncements and real pledges made by political leadership. Resolutions are passed, targets are set, we have important agreements now to work towards. But in the discussion I had, it was a brief discussion around my table, one of the questions that came up was how do you actually make all of this relevant to the local communities on the ground? How do you make the goals relevant on a national and local level? And I wonder who of you would like to take on this issue. So how do you make what we are talking about, which is great on an international level, how do you actually make it translate on a more practical level when it comes to local communities seeing the benefits of this?
We talked about education and the partnerships, especially international partnerships. And we have defined that good governance on local levels, clear vision, clear goals, and leadership are of utmost importance. I have some personal experience myself working with Afghanistan. We brought broadband internet to more than 20 universities. But when we try to establish partnerships between universities in other parts of the world and Afghanistan, there always came in the issue of trust and of good governance. How can we trust that the funding, the scholarships, will be channeled into the right goals, and that the person sitting on the other side is actually the person who should be taking the exams and who should be getting that kind of education? So good governance and transparency, fighting corruption on the local levels is crucial to building trust.
And how important is it to build partnerships with technical and with the technical and scientific community? And I look to you, Hayat Sinti, perhaps as a crucial element that can help us advance every SDG from health onto education, onto innovation and infrastructure, as you mentioned earlier. How crucial is that element of partnership?
Is essential because I believe science and technology, it will be behind the solution for everything that we face, and that's why we're here. I think we need to emphasize to the community the reality. We emphasize on the reality more and more. We need to be aware of what science and technology can do, and also get the policymakers and the business and the civil society, all of them in one table to discuss about how they can move forward. Because that, if we like it or not, you know, business is the key factor to move things forward. I mean, I sit in many different organizations. I'm a scientist, but I want one of the 30 women be appointed in the Shura Council in Saudi Arabia. So now I wear different scarf, I don't want to say hat, because I can see how it's important to translate the importance of science to the decision makers, because that's what the real changes happen. So we need to make the policymaker aware of the risk, and aware of the opportunities, what can science and technology can make, so they can take it further in terms of education, inject the tools of innovation to for the young generation, come with the new ideas, open to the new market and collaboration within fit with an infrastructure.
Okay, well, from a youth perspective, Rick and Patel, I turn to you. How do you turn the world's problems, challenges into opportunities? I mean, are we simply creating excitement and expectation around these SDGs? How do we deliver them? When do we deliver them? And what are the modalities with which we can deliver them in a way that will, live up to the expectations?
Yeah, I think this goes back to your earlier question of, does this matter to anybody in the real world, outside this world here? Does it matter to anybody? And my answer to that is, it depends if you win. Like, this here is a vision. It's a plan to save the world. It's a campaign to save the world. And it means something to people if you deliver on it. And I feel like it is a tremendous opportunity. I really honor the contributions of everybody in this room to creating this, because this gives us a chance to be one people with one vision. But to deliver on this, we know, all of us in business, all of us in government, we know we don't get stuff done without teams. That's how you get something done. And when I hear partnerships, I hear we've got a vision, and we've got one people with one vision. Can we form a team? Can we have the right roles, the right prioritizations, the right strategies? And can we, and this is important for the public sector to hear, I think, because the private sector, I don't come from the private sector, but I think the private sector understands that teams succeed when they have great cultures. And we need a great culture in our public sector, one that allows us to choose to trust each other, allows us to overcome a lot of the constraints that we face. Then we deliver, then we win, then it matters.
Thank you, Rick. And can we better communicate our achievements and our partnerships? Jeff Seabright, in a nutshell, how important is it to make the progress partnerships create actually more visible to people?
Well, I think it's critically important to do that, but it's a challenge, because the more specific you get, when I go out and I talk to, on college campuses, you need to get into some detail to really understand what it means to clean up supply chains around avoided deforestation. It's not a bumper sticker. And so part of the challenge that I think we collectively have is to translate what is required at the sort of the coalface of these issues to get real progress into the aspirational values that are behind this campaign. But I think it is critical, and most especially to communicate success. We are seeing real successes in this space, and we need to do a better job of amplifying them and creating a belief and an understanding that we can tackle these. These are not intractable challenges. These are huge opportunities, and we have made progress. There's just much more to be done.
Thank you so much. And just finally turning over to the President of Croatia as well. Do you find that we've taken on too much? The MDG framework was more limited, more focused on the developing world. It had just 8 goals. We're now looking at 17. We've made it universal. How optimistic are you about the feasibility of this, given the right partnerships?
I am optimistic, provided we do take bold decisions and demonstrate that leadership that is needed and install the kind of communication that we talked about today. The world needs leadership. We need the SDGs. It's not only about developing countries, it's also about developed countries, because today's threats to security and preconditions for development do not recognize borders. They do not recognize people's ethnic or religious background. So we need partnerships. We need to be working together, and partnerships can truly make a difference.
Thank you very much indeed. This ends our fascinating discussion. I know that we said that we would hear from those of you who would like to make contributions. If there is one quick contribution, I'll take it, but otherwise we'll move on to our final concluding remarks. Thank you very much indeed for joining us for this part.
Thank you.
So allow me to say just a couple of words in conclusion. As we come to the conclusion of our high-level lunch on partnerships for SDGs, I'd like to thank everyone here for their great participation. I'm sure all the deliberations, the note-taking, the information on the tablets will prove very useful. Let me just remind everyone to please return the tablets. I've gotten used to it myself, and I don't mind sort of putting it in my bag, but I won't. I shall, not give in to that temptation. So we will return these. But on behalf of the President of the General Assembly, thank you all very much for making this a fruitful debate. I'd like to thank President Lukatov for his initiative in bringing us all here together, all the multi-stakeholders in this process, and for inviting me to be part of this. Finally, let me invite Ms. Lisa Kinko, the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact, to make her closing remarks. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I want to spend your last 2 minutes of energy before you go to other events on this exciting day. I have been asked to just briefly summarize what are the experiences that the UN has had in creating partnership with business over the last many years, based on the fact that the UN Global Compact that I'm leading has thousands of business members across the world that have been eager to partner with UN over the last more than 10 years. So let me just share with you 3 main observations that I think will be really important as we move forward and hopefully create even more partnerships between the UN entities and business. First of all, we need very good business integrity. We need to make sure that the companies we partner with build on the same values and principles as we hold throughout the Global Compact on environment, on human rights, on anti-corruption, on labor standards. It's very important to have a common mindset, and we think the partnerships will be better long-term when we build on the same principal values. My second point is, and that comes from feedback from many of the companies that have partnerships across the UN, is that it can be difficult to navigate in our family of UN companies. And it's very important that we find one place that companies can plug in to identify the best business partner for them. So we have that at the moment, but again, I think something we can gear up and become even better at with all the opportunities for new partnerships that we have with the 17 SDGs. My final point is that looking at the range of partnerships that have been going on for the last 10 years, the ones that work best are the ones that have a real problem to solve, and very often on the ground in a country across the world. So it's not symbolic partnerships that we all feel we need so that we can say we have all these nice partnerships. No, it's solving real problems. And here I feel we have great opportunities. Having several UN entities on the ground in various countries that could work together with companies that have specific problems to solve. So we are running a campaign at the Compact that we call Making Global Goals, Local Business. And part of that is to become even better at facilitating and gathering the right partners, both among business but also among UN entities, to solve real problems on the ground, because that is what we will need to make the SDGs a reality rather sooner than later. So thank you for the opportunity to share these 3 observations. And learning is always a good thing when you move forward to big challenges. And I think that's a very important part of the process for all of us that wants to see partnerships succeed. Thank you very much.